so much has changed. I think the biggest thing that changed was it used to be believed to be a mythical skill, like you were either born with it or you weren't, right? And there's this black box of like people who could tell who were designers and who wasn't. And once I got into the industry, I realized really quickly that it was not only not a black box, it was very much a trainable skill, right? But like most nascent industries that haven't, the developers haven't taken the time to learn how their own industry works, it feels magical even to them, right? In fact, talked to a lot of designers who are like, oh, I just wing it, right? But if you look at what they do, it's actually procedural. Now, since then, I would say a few things have happened. One, we've got a lot more audience communication. Right? I think one of the biggest points of friction I had internally to Blizzard was that, hey, everyone had their friend they would ask about a piece of content or whatever. Oh, I know a guy who's a rogue and, fires a heaven or whatever, right? Or in my case, it was No Ma'am on BlackRock. But I realized that even though, the whole thing was developers shouldn't talk to the audience, I'm like, but we're actually doing that. We're just not doing it very effectively or very efficiently. And there's just a couple figureheads who would talk on forums. So one of the things I've seen, and you can see this now, and everyone at Blizzard who wants to communicate with the community has a Twitter, right? They can just share and communicate directly. And when I joined at Riot, it was very much, we talk to players. That's how we may develop our games. We take that feedback, we iterate. Now I've been working with studios and they're like, we're going to bring in audience before we've even started the game, right? Or like literally when we're on the foundational steps where it's super rough and talk to them about what we're building and get feedback from them week to week to see if we're trending right. Like that is the level of difference. We've gone from these towers of secrecy, can't let anyone know what we're developing, to we got to tell everyone immediately, right? I think the pendulum may have swung a little too far the other way, but I think that direction is very much an improvement in a world where there's so many games.
I do, as someone, I work in old school RuneScape, and we are super community focused. But if I just finished the Jason Schreier book on Blizzard, and it was really interesting to read how so much of gaming back then was like, we're going to build something that we think is fun. And we're not gonna, not even that we're not going, there just weren't the tools and the culture to go into the community first and play test and ask people, which I find so fascinating because when WoW came out, like it was just this brand new thing. Even when TBC was this first major expansion, you guys didn't necessarily foolproof that the design and that the dungeons and everything, you guys just thought this is going to be fun. Let's do it. What were one of the major lessons you learned from working on the Burning Crusade? Just to start there, like, I'm sure there were loads, but maybe like one of the harder ones that you're like, okay, I thought this would be great, but it wasn't.
All right, I know exactly which story I'm gonna tell. So, wow, there's a lot of learning I did on Burning Crusade, right? I would say it was kind of like my design adolescence, right? Like a little game when I was 13 was my childhood. But there I had to learn how to be part of a team as well as how to learn and internalize, company philosophies and things like that. And the very first raid dungeon they gave me was Ramparts, right? The one that ended with, there was a demon fight and then there was a flying Drake, Nazan, and Vazrudin. Yes. Yeah, that was the very first dungeon I'd give, but it was mostly planned out, right? GS Mercer basically said, hey, it's pretty much here, go and let Joe do this demon boss. I'm like, okay. And for most part, it was like, make a guy who life drains and make some minions that will kill themselves. And I'm like, okay, it's very simple, very straightforward stuff. And so it was pretty much placing things that had already been built down. I didn't really do much design until the end fight, where the story guy basically was like, can you make a flying dragon? I'm like, yeah, probably. And I didn't realize how far over my head I was getting doing this, but made it work eventually. Anyways, as a result, that character was supposed to be, that boss was supposed to be the second to last, but by nature of where it was placed and its visibility, people would always do it last because right near the exit, so they do that little circuit. And so in a way, it ended up kind of stealing the thunder from Joe's boss. Joe's now the director on Diablo 4, and that team. He was his boss, supposed to be the final one, and the dragon flying around ended up being, the one that landed. Was the 2 phases was the one that stole the show. But that was straightforward, right? I was like, okay, follow the numbers, do exactly what I'm told, easy. Then I was given the Underbog, and Mercer was like, "Oh,
Whoa.
you did the first one fine. Just go and try some things. Play around with this. I don't really know what I'm doing here. We got a couple ideas for bosses. We just know one of them going to be this weird stalker thing, like three. It's going to end up being this.
Yeah, the long thing. Yeah.
Yeah, War of the Worlds. But that's we didn't have a model, so it was just like a dragon. It was just like a little dragon that was sitting in that room. And I'm like, okay, well, whatever. So I didn't really understand how to spawn a dungeon like that, and I dramatically overspawned it because I made it feel natural, right? I put all of these flying bug creatures whizzing around in swarms overhead. Do you remember the little canister with like the Hydra in it, and you would
Yes.
swim out the back? Okay. Well, that part, when you got to the crack in the back, I decided I wanted to make a tunnel full of bugs. And I'm like, let me just make a tunnel full of these terrifying bugs. It was such a long dungeon. I'm like, just make this easier. I'm going to AoE these 3 hit point creatures. But I didn't really understand at that point. I had a computer science background, but I didn't really understand performance, the way that Bones trained performance, because all these little things controlling all these little things. And that usually when you have lots of little creatures, they're not the same fidelity as larger creatures. So I took the little Silithid bugs from Karazhan and just scaled them down super tiny and put about 2,000 of them in this hallway. And I'm like, great, you're going to walk through and, and just hit AoEs and kill them. Yeah. Well, I had a brand new computer, and development computers are phenomenal, right? They're high performance. They have lots of memory. I think it was like, like 8 gigs of memory back then, which is a big deal, right? Because we had to run servers, and everyone ran their server. Well, I had about 2,000 of these creatures. And so eventually, this one guy, his name was Colin Murray. Yes, remember, because he was running around the office playing hockey, or talking about playing hockey. I never actually saw him play hockey, but I'm assured that he did play hockey. Colin Murray goes, "Hey, man, I heard that this tunnel in your dungeon is super non-performant. I figure it's a level designer issue, but I figured, could you come over and look at it with me?" Like, yeah, let's take a look at it. And he's like, he walks in, he's like, "Oh, okay, there's a bunch of things flying around, not too bad." Then we go around, he's like, "Okay, well, line of sight, a lot of line of sight stuff going on here. Why does it start lagging when you get here?" It was like before you even got to this hallway. And I'm like, "I don't know." He's like, they did so much of polling. It was like, "What is this?" Goes over, walks through the wall. If he had clippings, he just turned the clipping off. He walks through the wall. He's like, "Oh my God, what is this?" I'm like, "I wanted a hallway full of bugs, and I didn't want it to take too long to kill, so I just made them 100 hit points and super tiny." He's like, "Yeah, you can't do that."
You're breaking the game, man.
Yeah, he's like, "Yeah, computers, dude, do you know what most people play this game on?" I'm like, "No." Walked me down to quality assurance. And eventually, Mercer, the guy who was, running, my supervisor, did the same. Not this, but he sat down and said, "You can't do that, blah, blah." But he went down and like, "This is the computer that we test on. It's our min spec machine. Try loading this." It wouldn't even load. And I'm like, "Oh." He's like, "Yeah, you gotta like tone it back a lot." So deleted all of that, put in some regular spawns. I think it was like a cluster of a few like larger bugs, like 3 or 4 of them or something. I don't even remember these days. Anyways, put a guy with a druid with a hunter with a bear or something, or
Yes,
simple
exactly.
instead at the end, and then went out and then basically had nothing else until the stalker. And I had to go through and I had to prune so much shit. In fact, I think Scott came in at that point and was just like, "I'm just going to delete this and show you how this should be spawned." I'm like, "Okay." He kept the same monsters, but he's just like, have you pull tested this? I'm like, "Pull testing?" He's like, "Oh." Right? Because there's all these habits that he had accumulated over the years of developing dungeons and how to approach them. And I had to learn all of them from scratch, right? So yeah. So that was like one of the first lessons I learned. And a little bit after that, I got to work on Karazhan. Now, Karazhan was a different beast, right? In that case, Scott had most of the enemies already built and planned out. It was just placing them. Or no, he did the placement. He did a lot of the placement of them there. I did the abilities and things with Joe. Joe and I were basically started like the same within a month of each other. Joe was the favored child, though. Mercer liked him a lot more because Joe was like chill and really like, he was funny, but he rarely spoke. I you can tell I talk all the time,
Oh
right?
yeah.
So I was kind of the black sheep of the design family at that generation. But I would do crazy shit that no one else would, right? So he was like, "Here, I'm going to give you a mage watch. Just make it the coolest mage ever." I'm like, "Okay." Shade of Iran. And so I went around and I walked over to Kevin Jordan, and I'm like, "What are all the abilities you cut on mages?" He's like, "Oh, I cut this, because let me look through the spell database." And I'm like, "Oh." I went and started just putting them back in on this super mage. And so I had this guy who was chain of icing people and casting pyroblasts and AoEs. And then I basically just said, I'm going to do 3 unique abilities. Everything else is going to be cookie cutter mage shit, right? And so I made, the arcane explosion. Oh, sorry, that alarm must remind me this is when we're supposed to start.
Yeah, we started early.
So the very first one I made was an arcane explosion. I'm like, it's gonna make it big, and you have to hide in the cubbies because this room, right, this environment had these little spaces. So I'm like, okay, teleport them to the center, AoE radius, done, right? And actually made it a little smaller. You can actually stand outside the cubbies, but don't tell the players that. They don't want to know. Then the next one was a blizzard, but I'm like, blizzards always hold still. Let's make it move. And we just put it on a little clock. And by the way, to do that, you didn't have the ability to dynamically move or position AoE effects, right? So the way it works, there's actually a tiny little infernal, like this guy. And he runs around in a circle. And Shade of Iran is just throwing pulses of blizzard on top of that infernal every interval or so, which is why you sometimes can stand in the particles as you move out, as you get out of the way. And for the last one, I'm like, okay, I got arcane, I got frost, I got to do something with fire. Well, one of these makes you run away. The other makes you run around in a circle, but not if you're melee. I need one that makes people do something differently. And one of my mentors before Blizzard talked about how there's this importance of pacing, right? Of taking a breath, of stopping, of putting intervals and space into your designs. And a lot of the design at that point was just frenetic, constant things happening, but put in intentional pauses. So I'm like, I'm going to make people stop moving. And so I talked to Rob Pardo and pitched him to this idea. Rob Pardo is the president of design at this point. And I'm like, what if I made this thing and I had a fiery ring and I found this literally a bonfire that when I scaled it up, the particles emitted in a circle instead of in like a little bundle. It was literally a bonfire particle that I repurposed. And I'm like, what if I use this as a boundary, and if you cross it, you take a bunch of damage? You're like, oh, that sounds clean. Do it. So I went and did it. And sure, it worked, right? I tested it as I was a caster. This was another good lesson here. I tested it as a caster player, right? Sitting in there in the back. I'm like, I run around and fire up. I'm standing in the middle. And because it was testing, and I only tested it independently, right? There was one person and one ring of fire, and if I moved around inside of it, everything was fine, no problems. And we got it through most of the testing. I got it to QA, and I'm like, all right, let's do some play testing. And I explained all the abilities to them. They then jumped on my server on like actual physical box, and we had 30, 40 people just churning. I think we churned for like 3 or 4 hours just on this fight as I was tuning hit points and damage and made the elementals spawn in and then made them spawn in different timing. Oh, and the big sheep moment, that was just sheer comedy. Like back in that day, mages would duel by sheeping someone and then pyroblasting them. So I put that in because it was like, homage to the way players played the game. And great, we got the tuning pretty good, but at most of the part, they're like, why are we setting off these AoEs? I'm like, just stop, don't move out of them. And they're like, okay, so they just stopped moving completely. I'm like, okay, that's a fine solution, right? Got to live and it was all working well. And then I realized what was happening. So you were a player of WoW, and I assume, are a lot of your audience players of WoW, or do we have some folks who haven't played WoW here?
I would say quite a few are. Absolutely.
Quite a few are, okay. So in a raid, players are scattered around, right? So I would put this circle down around one person, but I didn't make sure it was that person who didn't have to leave. So, because if that was the way I'd set up, the game would have worked fine, right? It said, hey, you are the one who cannot leave the circle. It's fine. If anyone runs through, maybe give them some flavor damage, but don't do anything crazy. But instead what happens is when you place the circle on one person, another person a few feet to left, and they're physically standing in fire, and they're like, I have been trained, I will not stand in the fire. And they run out of the fire. And that detonates the explosion effect, which I put in for flavor. I'm like, oh, it'll put a little bit of damage and make them knock up, so you can see who popped out, who messed up, and you
Yeah,
can call them
just
out, haha,
flying
you
in the
did
air.
the thing. And you know, unfortunately, when we built that room, it had a pretty low ceiling, so you'd pop up a little bit and you'd fall down, wouldn't take any falling damage. But one of the artists seeing that was like, oh man, it'll look way better if I make the ceiling even higher. They raised the physical collider on the ceiling so you could fly way high up. Shipped live, and you flew way high, and then you would die. And when you died, you would go back into the AoE and you would detonate it a second time. So one person would pop and fall down, and then they would do a second explosion. And I am like, oh God, I need to fix this. I have to fix this right now. But the way back in those days, hotfixing wasn't as cleanly done back then. You could change fields and numbers. You couldn't really change scripts. Or you could, but it was very difficult to do. So I was like, I'll just fix it. Next time we patch, it'll be better. And yeah, GS Mercer came in and said, nope. People are, and this is when people had started a chant. You shall not move when Flame Wreath is cast or the raid will blow up. I don't remember the song. I'm sure there's someone out there who does.
Yeah.
But anyways, and I'm like, okay, this is silly. Let's just fix this. Back those days, no, if players found a way around it, you don't fix it. That's a philosophy I think was wrong then, and probably and understandably, he was trying to teach me a lesson about the consequence of my actions, but it just ended up hurting more players who wanted to play it later. In retrospect, knowing everything I know now, I could have hotfixed it, but I didn't have the technical sophistication or knowledge. Back when my third month there at Blizzard. Yeah, maybe it was later than 3 months. I don't know, but whatever.